Hi, my name is Simone Riva, and I'm a property owner at Mallard Lakes. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the independent research that I have performed on behalf of Mallard Lakes and share that information with you so that you're fully aware and can make informed decisions. I've also included here a link to our website, the Mallard Lakes Sustainability website, where you can review the information yourself and see all the sources and where the information came from. I'd like to reiterate that this is independent research. It is not in any way affiliated with the Mallard Lakes Community Association. Today we'll talk about the purpose of the research and the purpose of the information sharing session, what we know today, what I've learned over the past year, what's missing, and the most promising funding options that are out there that I found so far, and what we can do as homeowners. So in regard to purpose, the idea is to share clear factual information with you. So know that the Mallard Lakes Board has provided a tidal water report as well as a follow-on PowerPoint where they talked about their recent status of their research and their efforts. But that information is at times more limited than the information that you should probably understand. So we're going to share that clear factual information. We're going to focus on options and next steps and not blame anyone. We're all in this together and we need to work on it together. We want to help homeowners feel informed before that special flood meeting on flood mitigation that the board has talked to us about happening maybe in the January or February timeframe. Additionally, it's about empowering us with knowledge. My intent is to make sure you know everything that I know so that when we have this meeting, you can make a well-informed decision or request of the board what you would like to see or have happen on your behalf. So long story short, I'm just a homeowner who became curious and wanted answers. And I used my government financial background and my risk background to help. So what we know today, and from the current conditions based on the tidal water presentation done at the October owners meeting, daily tidal water under the buildings, under 8 specific buildings, continues on a frequent basis, sometimes daily, depending on the building. Shoreline erosion is real and ongoing. Sandy was the only interior flood event, so even though there were 44 flood insurance claims since the inception of Mallard Lakes against the National Flood Insurance Program, Sandy was the only event where interior flood events occurred. Insulation is being replaced in some buildings on piles, and the Route 54 renovation and sea level rise contributed to the changes in the tidal lake, in the water levels. And then most of the historic facts that were presented are well understood by the community and not really controversial. And in fact, the representatives I talked to at the county and state level were all very conversant on the flooding impacts of Mallard Lakes and what happened during Sandy. So I don't think there's many in the state of Delaware that don't know that there are flooding issues at Mallard Lakes. What the board definitely got right in their presentation was that the tidal water is higher than when the community was first built. Some buildings are definitely regularly impacted by daily tides. Erosion is real. Floodgate could be physically possible. Any major project would require a membership vote if it's over $20,000 based on the Mallard Lakes bylaws. And what we need clarified before we vote as homeowners is that there were very few numbers in the presentation that were supported by engineering or studies that have been performed on Mallard Lakes. So a lot of it was based on, you know, discussions that maybe had, or understandings of how things were, but none of them have actual engineering or environmental consultant studies that back them up. A study has not been done on Mallard Lakes. What has been done is informal conversations. It is estimates from engineering firms. Most of the information that result in a dollar figure are not supported by contracts or other formal documents. And that is definitely needed. Federal and state funding alternatives were not always correct, and in some cases incomplete. So, for example, where there was a statement made that said there are no grants that will be possible for Mallard Lakes unless there's actual flood damage. There are some grants that work that way, where you have to have actual flood damage, but there are also a lot of other grants that are there to prevent future flood damage. Federal and state, the Inland Bay engineering feasibility study was completely omitted. So there's a whole nother study that's currently ongoing now. Mallard Lakes is part of that scope, but the board did not discuss that with us. The elevation cost estimates, which the board said would be over $21 million, is not really based on any sort of study or specific look at Mallard Lakes to see what would be required to elevate buildings or which buildings needed to be elevated. Several other federal and state programs could help Mallard Lakes, and those were omitted. And then claims about future assessments to owners are really premature. I understand and applaud the board for pursuing a floodgate option, but based on the fact that there's very little hard evidence that indicates that a tidal gate is really our best option or even option we should be pursuing, I think it's premature to tell us that we potentially would spend $1.7 million and $3,000 worth of assessments without even having talked or had an expert come in to basically verify that those numbers are accurate or that a tidal gate will even help us. And the board themselves said that the tidal gate will not help with storm surge because of information they informally obtained from DelDOT. So even that assumption is a little bit shaky based on the fact that it hasn't been fully studied. What I've learned over the last year. After the owners meeting on October of 2024, I approached the board and I'd asked them where the information was in regard to how Mallard Lakes has addressed their flooding related issues. When I found out there had been things done, like the engineering estimate on a previous floodgate, I was very enthusiastic that the board had done what was required to help us, but there was nothing in writing. So I started working with Stacy Selby, who very collaboratively provided some of the history and some of the information on previous events that had occurred. And I was very grateful for that. Once I got enough information, not only from Stacy, but from other people like environmental consultants and environmental engineers and the Corps of Engineers, I pulled together all my research. Stacy had kind of given it the once over to make sure it looked like it was accurate, and I presented it to the board. I received 25 minutes to provide that presentation. During that presentation, I told them that I would be happy to run a flood committee for them or be part of it to help continue to figure out ways to predominantly not just understand what had happened, but to figure out what was going to happen or what could happen in the future, always with the goal to try to keep this as any sort of future expenses or costs to a minimum. And because I have a government background and a government finance background, I know how to get money from the government. I did research in that regard about what grants and what other government programs could potentially be an option for Mallard Lakes. Always with the understanding that any information that I found I would give to the board. After that discussion in the January or February timeline with the board decided to, the board thanked me for my research, but they basically decided to go it on their own within the board. But however, I wanted to make sure that you had the information you needed and you had transparency in the process. So I created the Mallard Lakes Sustainability website so that you had the same access to the information as I did. And I talked to dozens and dozens of people to get this research. I found stuff online. I talked to flooding experts. I talked to environmental consultants. I talked to engineers, from the Corps of Engineers to DENREC. I talked to drainage people. I talked to everyone I could find. There's support groups that help communities with flooding. I talked to them. I talked to University of Delaware. I talked to everyone to try to see what was out there. How could they help us? I told them what our specific problems were. I did what I could to try to find anything that could help us. And what I did find was that Mallard Lakes is eligible for more programs than what were communicated to you all in the board meeting. DENREC and USACE, which is an acronym for the Corps of Engineers, confirmed we are not only eligible for the CAP 205 program, which I'll tell you about in a couple slides, but we're also eligible for this Inland Bay program that's actually underway now. It's predicted that study will be completed by 2030, and by the time that the projects are identified and prioritized, the federal government would cover up to 90% of the cost of that. The other 10% would be covered by state and local governments. So in that instance, if we're successful with that study, then basically the government, either federal, state, or local, would cover 100% of the costs, which would mean we would not even have to spend any community money. Now, having said that, government isn't fast and it's very bureaucratic, but this process would be managed between the county, state, and federal government. We wouldn't really even be involved as a community other than to make our process, our property available for their studying and different activities that they would have to perform. And obviously the board, along with our support, would have to make that decision. But the fact of the matter is, the Inland Bay study is a real thing, and we're part of the scope. The state and county have not issued any permanent no when it comes to providing us with program support that includes funding. So what I mean by that is during the 2020 to 2024 years, there was a lot of money for flood mitigation. At this point in time, several flood mitigation programs, like at FEMA, for example, have been cut. And so I'm 100% certain that when the board spoke with different government representatives, they may have very well told them that there's no money available now. But that does not mean there wouldn't be money in the future. We are eligible for these programs, and we should keep them on our radar and make sure that we get the funding that we're possibly eligible for. We shouldn't give up. We should try. And then engineering studies usually come before design decisions. So I'm very much thrilled to hear that the board is pursuing the tidal gate. But on the other hand, it's kind of premature, as I mentioned on the other slide, because you really need to to really understand the specifics of our community, to really understand what is the best mitigation. And it's probably not just one thing. It may be, there may be some gate that could be installed. There may be some vegetation that could be planted. There may be more riprap that's needed. There may be some elevation for some buildings, but you don't know that until you actually seriously have people that are skilled in this area in environmental engineering and environmental consulting and coastal management take a look at our property and do studies on how the water flows, where is the wetlands, what's the hydrology look like for our community. And at that point, they're the ones that should tell us what we think needs to happen. And then we could have a strategy for how to meet it. So again, I applaud the board's position in regard to trying to. So as I mentioned, I keep mentioning this idea of a study or a feasibility study. And I thought it would be helpful to really understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a feasibility study. So I honestly think the study word gets tossed around a lot more than maybe most people understand. I think the tidal water report refers to the insulation as a study. That's not the type of study I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a study where engineers come in and take a look at our flooding model, the flooding models that they have. They help determine the daily tides. They look at storm surge. They look at the costs of elevation, of drainage improvements, of shoreline improvements. They provide engineering level accuracy. And honestly, if we're really going to aggressively go after grants and government programs, we really need to have that information in order to make that case to people like Sussex County that here's the specifics of what our problem is, and based on this educated knowledge, this is what we need from you. Why Mallard Lakes needs one, as I mentioned, there's no engineering work that has been done to date at Mallard Lakes. Even though we have some very preliminary cost estimates, they're not meaningful without really understanding the specific topology and hydrology of Mallard Lakes. DENREC actually uses these to evaluate funding. The Corps of Engineers program requires this step. Having this clears our path to government funding. And homeowners deserve that sort of clarity before we're asked to vote on anything. So what a feasibility study could show is whether a floodgate will help or not. I mean, we've even heard from our own board that based on preliminary discussions with DelDOT that they don't even think that the floodgate could be closed during storm surge, which really means that even if we spent the time and money and expense on the floodgate, the variable floodgate, that it may only help us during the day-to-day tides and not even things like king moons and unusual moons. But if we actually had a feasibility study, they would look at that and they would confirm that what DelDOT thinks might happen would actually happen. They would confirm if a floodgate really is the best option, or what maybe a better option is pumping water out or dredging or doing any of the many different solutions that could potentially help us. They would tell us whether elevation is actually needed. They would tell us what sort of shoreline restoration we require. And like I said, it's probably going to be some combination of things like vegetation, riprap, barriers, like some of the many different flood mitigation processes that occur. And then obviously they could look at different scenarios to tell us, what would be potentially the best options for us, and maybe what would be the best options that we can support now, or even which ones would we do first, how could we phase it, all those different things. Based on my discussions with the Army Corps of Engineers, the cost of doing a full-blown engineering study is pretty expensive and something we still probably could not cover out of our community funds if this is a route we wanted to go. But there is something called an environmental assessment, which can be done by environmental consulting firms that would do a delineation to see exactly where our wetlands are. And then based on that, they would do some amount of preliminary studies to give us more information and even cost estimates of how much it would cost to correct the various problems around our community. And at least at that point, it would take out the guesswork of what we need to do. And it would give us that key information to help go to the government and tell them this is what we specifically need. And we would finally have an answer to what is it can be done, and not just jumping to an educated guess about what we think is the best way to do it. So here are the two most promising funding options. I've already spoken about the Delaware Inland Bay study, but just to give you a little bit more on that study, is that they are looking at the entire bay system for Sussex County, which would include all the way the bays from starting from Rehoboth, going all the way down to where we are in what they call in the study the Little Assawoman Bay area. So that is a promising study, but it's a little farther off. What I'd like to spend more time on this slide talking to you about is the Continuing Authority Program, CAP 205. Basically, it is a small flood mitigation program. Back in 2014, DENREC asked the Corps of Engineers to perform this assessment of the entire Little Assawoman Bay area. So they looked at about 10 different communities and assessed their ability to be able to fix them. And they determined that only Mallard Lakes would be able to be corrected based on the funding and the scope and the rules of this CAP 205 program. So I know there's some discussion in our community about, well, hey, we live in a coastal region and you can't fix this. I would tell you that even Bethany Beach and would love to fix their problems. Their solutions might be harder. Ours can be fixed. The Corps of Engineers already looked at that and said, yes, we think we can fix this. And they determined that we are eligible. And based on my discussions with the people that run this program, they said that we are still eligible. The problem that we have is that the federal government only covers a portion of this cost. And so we need a non-federal sponsor. Non-federal does not mean a private community like us. It means it has to be through another government entity like the state or local government. Back in 2016, Sussex County had actually agreed to be the non-federal sponsor and then backed out. So Sussex County could again be that non-federal sponsor, but DENREC and DEMA could also be that non-federal sponsor on our behalf. Based on my conversations with them, the funding situation for these type of programs is austere. So it would be difficult. They just don't have the money right now. But that does not mean that in the future that money could not become available and we would still be eligible for this program. Additionally, they had said during the 2020 to 2024 timeframe, there was a lot of money for these types of programs. So it is not beyond the art of the possible. So again, our biggest problem is not that we're not eligible. It's that government funding is not available now. And I honestly believe that if we work together as a team and approached Sussex County as a united community, that we may get a different answer. So there are at least 2 Corps of Engineer programs that are still funding this type of activity. And in addition, DENREC Drainage has funding that could possibly used to do our environmental assessment that I just mentioned on the last chart. So whatever the cost of that may be, the DNREC drainage would also not do anything without actual real data. So we would need to have something that tells us what we need to do from an actual environmental consulting, environmental engineering perspective. And DNREC drainage said that that this money that they have set aside for us could potentially be used for a study. So what we can do as homeowners, our board is our elected officials, and they act on our behalf, but they serve us as well. So it's our responsibility to do what we need to do to thoroughly understand the situation and be able to guide and advise the board on how we want them to proceed on our behalf. So the bottom line is we all share responsibility for shaping the best path forward, and the best path forward could include asking for written clarification on unsupported statements, like how did they determine that every building in the flood zone would need to be elevated, or when do they have contracts that show that's the amount it would cost, for example. Please spread the word about the independent research so that the community in its whole is better informed prior to the special meeting. The tidal water report and the presentation is one set of facts. There are additional set of facts in these other documents that you all should be looking at. And in the Mallard Lake Sustainability website, every single one of them has a supporting reference or link or actual report that was used to come up with the conclusions that are in that website. Request the board allow more owners on the flood committee. It's been predominantly a board-driven event, which is great, but our bylaws also encourage open communication and transparency within the community. I do understand they've included a new transportation engineer, and I'm sure that's great experience. But we need, there may be other people in our community that have flood mitigation experience, or just general folks that want to be involved to help with the transparency aspects and be able to give their points of view on how they think or how the board could go about solving some of these situations, or even helping collect the information. Please encourage owners to attend the special meeting. The more of us that are informed and the more of us that participate, the better the outcome. Request transparency from the board. Keep gathering facts and stay curious and ask questions. What we should ask the board as a community is, would the board consider engaging an environmental consultant or engineering firm to perform an environmental assessment to help us with that grant application, to help us know what the right answers are? Will the board consider requesting some RC&D funds, so that's the DNREC drainage funds, for the initial assessment to reduce our costs so that we're not paying the entire share of any assessment that might be done? Will the board pursue a government feasibility study or elevation programs in the future? So just because we've gotten a no at this moment, will they pursue it in the future? And what other options besides the tidal floodgate would the board even consider? So those are just questions we should understand, because we're all in this together. There is a positive vision for Mallard Lakes. We have time. There's no need to rush into solutions that may not be the best solution for Mallard Lakes. We have options. There are grants and other funding programs that will support flood mitigation without existing flood damage. We can get help DEMA and DENREC have indicated that when funding profiles change, they're fully open to continue supporting Mallard Lakes in determining how to fix the Mallard Lakes flooding issues. And in addition, Sussex County also indicated that they would be supportive and understanding the results of the Inland Bay study and potentially being that non-federal sponsor. We can choose a solution that protects property values and fairness. Our biggest problem and our biggest long-term issue in Mallard Lakes is flood mitigation. There are solutions. They're not cheap, they're not easy, they are time-consuming, but there are options. And we really need to figure out how to make those happen. And finally, we need a long-term neighbor network. A group of us, or hopefully all of us, that understand flood readiness and resilience, and for us to work together as a team and go united to petition our government to get the support that we need. Because united, we stand. Divided, we fall. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope this answered some questions. I know that there's a positive future for Mallard Lakes if we work together. If you have any questions, please email me at mlsustainability2025@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.